Welcome back to another episode of the IMG series. My name is Christina. I am a Filipino IMG from the Philippines, currently in Austin, Texas. Today, I have an amazing guest. Her name is Dr. Cynthia Tan, who just recently matched and started her intern year in anesthesiology. Hello, Cynthia. Welcome, and I'm so happy you're here.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm so glad we connected.
I know. So a little bit of a backstory. So Ash had tagged us on Instagram in like one of her Instagram stories, and she tagged both of us. And then Cynthia like messaged me and said that we had like so many similarities. And I was just like, holy moly, this is so crazy. I started stalking her Instagram, looking through her profile. I was like, she's 100% right. We are probably like soul sisters. And I was pitching to Cynthia that we should like eventually meet in person because we're so alike in so many ways. But yeah, I'm so glad you were here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we can do this.
Yes, I'm so excited. So with all the guests that come on this series, I like to start off by asking, tell us a little bit about, your background, where you are now in your career.
Okay, so I'm Cynthia. I am a Malaysian Chinese, but I grew up in Australia, went to medical school in England, and I worked as an intern or like an FY1 equivalent in England for a year, and then moved to the US. I had nearly 2 years of a gap between finishing in England and starting residency. And in that time, I did my master's in public health. And now I am a PGY1 in anesthesiology in New Jersey.
Well, huge congratulations to you, because it sounds like you've been able to have that wonderful opportunity of like living in different countries and experiencing different cultures. I also like to ask people on the series why you decided to pursue the USMLEs in the first place.
So for me, the US was something that I never really thought about, which is probably different to a lot of IMGs because, they like the US was the end goal for them.
Yeah.
I went to the UK and I was like, okay, the UK has good training. I could possibly stay here. Coming from Australia, that was an option for me as well to go back to Australia. The US was something I was like, would be awesome because of how cool, and how advanced technology and research and everything is. But it just seemed too hard to get to, especially with the USMLEs and all the hurdles. And I was like, I think that's not that's something I would love to do, but I just don't know if I could do it.
Right.
And then I met a guy who was American, and that changed everything. I was like, okay, I guess I have to go and revisit this USMLE thing, so like in the first 2 years of med school, I thought about it and like I kind of just went back and forth again, like I said, because it just seemed way too hard, which I feel like most IMGs would relate to, like,
Right.
like, oh, it's easier just to stay home, it's easier to stay somewhere else. But yeah, like, so meeting my husband changed everything. I was like, okay, well, I now have to go sit the USMLEs, and that's how I ended up pursuing the USMLE.
Okay, that's an incredibly unique story, because usually it's like, I wanted to seek better opportunities in the US, this and that. But there was love involved in all of this and meeting your partner, your life partner, which I think is incredible. And so you obviously were able to experience what healthcare was like in the UK, and are now, experiencing what it's like in the US, like the US healthcare system. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek as to, how it's different in like based on your experience so far?
Sure. So I'm only a week into intern year, and I can already see the differences. Like, I come home and I tell my husband, I'm like this happened, but this is not how it's done in the UK, or this happened, and it's just so weird. So some big things that are very different is a lot of hospitals in the UK don't use EMR. We have electronic systems for like, requesting bloods or requesting scans and stuff. But a lot of the patient records and notes are handwritten. So that's a huge, big difference. Like yesterday, I was telling my colleagues, and they were just shocked. They're like, did you live like in like a rural area? What do you mean you wrote with pen and paper? I was like, that's how it's done. So that's one big like residency / training difference. The UK is also a national health system. So it's a universal health system. It's taxpayers that fund it. There's no insurance. So it's pretty much the same countrywide. Whereas in the US, every hospital, not even state, every hospital you go to is different because it's mainly private hospitals and private ran, and it's insurance based. So That's a huge difference. And because of that, it affects, funding for training, funding for residency, um, funding for interns, and so forth. And even the number of positions available. So in the UK, there's, I can't remember the exact number, but you have much less positions available for residency than the US has.
Right.
And another big difference is the hours. You work double the hours in the US compared to the UK. In the UK, a work week for me would be 45 to 50 hours. And then if you're on call, maybe a little bit more. But here I've done 5 days and I've worked over 60 hours. So yeah, very different work hours.
That's incredible.
It's but in saying that, training in the UK takes double the time of the US. So residency for example, for anesthesia, it's 10 years in the UK and it's 4 years in the US. So you're doing half the hours, but you're spreading it over double the years.
That makes sense. And correct me if I'm wrong, Cynthia, but it reminds me of the story that Dr. Ash Soni, who is a plastic surgeon practicing in the US. He's from the UK. He trained here in the US as a plastic surgery resident. And he told me one of the reasons he moved back to the UK, of course, one being his family, two, the work hours was a huge consideration. And is it something that the UK values, mental health? Is that something that they really put a premium on, because it seems to be spread out more as opposed to like kind of cramming all the work hours in and just like getting things done during a certain amount of time, or is it just like the way things work in the UK?
I think it is just the way things work. Okay. They definitely have more of an emphasis on mental health over the last couple of years because of junior doctor protests and like trying to get more people aware of it, because there's a lot of burnout. A lot of people in the UK do leave the UK after the first 2 years of residency to New Zealand and Australia because of better lifestyle as well. But because the UK, when they were part of the EU prior to Brexit, had this EU work hour regulations where you're not allowed to work over a certain hour. And that's why they kept that in place. And if you wanted to work over certain hours, like for example, if you want to take extra shifts and moonlight, you can, but you have to sign an agreement to say, I have waived my hour limit. Yeah.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And okay, so you mentioned that you grew up in Australia and then you moved to the UK, and of course now you're here. I wanted to ask you more, and this is my personal question to you.
Sure.
And I know we've talked a little bit about this before, but tell me how you are dealing with being away from your family, because I am struggling so badly with that right now. And I know a lot of IMGs can relate because a lot of them are here doing things on their own. What was it like for you to be away from your family? And of course, with COVID, that made it even harder because of all the restrictions. What are some of the things that you have found that helped you? And what are some of the things that you struggle with the most being away from your family?
That's a really good question. I think, like you said, a lot of IMGs can relate to that, especially IMGs that don't have family here and moved out here just for, training purposes or marrying someone in my case. So yeah, it was really tough because I moved here January last year, like 2 months prior to COVID. Well, actually, I came here September, November the year before, but I had to leave because I was only here on a tourist visa. And then I officially came in January last year with my green card. And then COVID happened, so it was hard to get out the house. I couldn't meet anyone. In between my husband and I, we only had one car at the time. So he was driving to like work or I think he had started work. So I was just kind of like stuck at home. I felt really trapped. I was like, okay, I'm stuck at home. I have no car. I have nothing. I don't have any friends. So it was really, really tough. I really struggled with it. Like I was often in tears and like breakdowns. I miss my friends. I miss my family. But things that really helped me was getting my dog. So having my dog was a huge blessing, because as hard as it was to like raise a puppy and having to bring him out at 2 and 4 a.m. in the middle of the night to let him pee, walking him, made me talk to people and meet people. And then eventually when we had a car, I brought him to the dog park, and I'd made a couple of friends now because of my dog. So that was a huge bonus. I mean, I'm not telling everyone to go get a dog because it is a lot of responsibility and a lot of work. But if that's something that you feel like you can afford to do, time and responsibility wise, it makes a huge difference. FaceTiming, it's a huge like help for me. I'm so glad and thankful for technology because I'm able to like catch up my family and friends and being able to see them. I mean, it's obviously very different to not be there physically with them.
Yeah.
But it does make a difference being able to see them. I mean, imagine 30-40 years ago when like our parents or whatever like went abroad to study, like all they had were expensive phone calls and letters. Yeah. So FaceTiming makes a huge difference. Having hobbies as well, like I love to cook, and that's something that I try to keep myself busy and do. So like baking, cooking, like whenever I feel a little down. So that really helps me. And also for me, like with my faith, being a Christian, like just prayers and like sometimes just like reminding myself to look back at like the Bible and just reading, and I'm like, okay, well, like remembering that I'm really not alone. So I think that was also a huge help for me.
You know what? I think, Cynthia, you just enumerated all of the things. I feel like I was listening to myself talk as you were talking, because it's the exact same thing that I went through, where it was, COVID. And I'm sure a lot of IMGs can also relate, because you don't come here with a lot of money as an IMG. You don't come here with a lot of access to transportation, to especially since you need a license and all of that, to obviously the driver's license and everything. So you come here feeling very isolated, very, this is a foreign world, foreign country. And it's like you mentioned, you don't have any friends. It was hard to meet people. And as you talked about, how your dog helped you very much. I read one of your posts on your Instagram, and you mentioned, you were telling the story about how it was Loki, your dog, who helped you get up because you had to take him out to poo, to pee, to go on walks and stuff. And that's the exact same thing I had to go through when I had Theo. I was like, oh, you're such a pain in the butt, but I need to take care of you. So I'm
exactly.
gonna get up. Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to do this, but I have to.
Exactly. So it's like, finding that dog, finding strength from like, taking care of our dogs, even though we didn't want to. I would just spend a lot of my time, laying in bed, because I was going through, a period of depression and things like that. And Theo would just like be barking nonstop. He would want to go out.
I feel ya.
Right. And so it's like, oh, you know what? Fine. If this is gonna, get you to stop, we'll go out, go for a walk and just be around people. It's weird. But yeah, anyway, so no, yeah. And like you said, hobbies, and of course, technology and your faith is important, which is also equally important to me. So I thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure a lot of IMGs can very much relate to what you just shared with us today. So let's transition to some of the questions that people had sent in. First of all, why anesthesiology? Tell us, like, how did that happen? What sparked your interest?
So many different things. I kind of went back and forth with anesthesia, mainly because I felt my step score wasn't good enough. But it was always something that I was interested in, and always something at the back of my head. So when I first had like a medical elective trip overseas, when I was my second year of med school, I was in Kathmandu in Nepal, where I worked with like a plastic surgery team and an anesthesiologist. And the anesthesiologist just amazed me. Everyone had so much respect for him, in the sense that he was like their friend. He was so calm. He was so patient with everyone. And the hospital, like in Kathmandu, they have this thing where they turn off electricity at a certain time of the day, every day, because I think they had to maintain like power for the city, because it was in like the mountains. So in the middle of the day, like power went off. We were getting ready for like this burn graft case, and the anesthesiologist just went on, did his thing, like got the patient ready for the case. And I was like, there is no power. This room is dark. Like, what are you doing? And it was fine. And I was like, wow. And throughout med school, anesthesiologists always were just willing to teach me. I would be in a surgery case, and the surgeon would just not even acknowledge my presence, for example. And the anesthesiologist was like, okay, do you know what's going on here? I'll teach you. Like all throughout med school, they were just so willing to teach me. I was like, man, they are such great teachers. And that obviously sparked interest for me. And also my undergrad was in pharmacology and molecular like biology. So I did pathology, micro, and I think anesthesia also has a lot of physiology, pathology, pharmacology,
Yes.
and like I really enjoyed that. So that kind of all tied in together. And the last thing would be my hobby, which is something that I was thinking about. Right, I was planning a post today, like writing about my hobbies and stuff. So I am a scuba diver, and one of my so one of my hobbies, I love just being in the ocean, like being away from the world, taking a break. And a lot of the diving medicine is related to anesthesia with like physics and gases, and I was like, everything just ties in so well together for me, and I just couldn't see myself doing anything else.
And
So
that's
that's
like,
why
yeah,
I'm
that's a good
here.
question. Yeah, I'm always interested to know why people choose the specialties they end up like going into, because there's always a story to it. Let's talk a little bit about your USMLE experience. I know everybody's USMLE experience is different in terms of like preparation, timeline, and all that stuff. Cynthia, share with us, especially as a non-US IMG, and you weren't really considering the US as like top priority at the time. What was, I guess, like one, what was your approach? And two, what are some of the things you struggled with while preparing for the
Sure.
USMLEs?
So with the step exams, as we all know, the step one is the most difficult, and then the step two CK is pretty doable if you're like, if you're done with med school or in your final year, because it's so much more clinical. So when I first looked into the step exam, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. Like, what is this? Because in the UK, med school is very clinical, and yeah, there are basic sciences, but you don't get the basic science emphasis you do in the US. So for me, I was like, I didn't know where to start. I was so lost, as most IMGs, get. Like, I was Googling and there were a billion resources out there.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I don't know what to start with. I don't know which one to do. And when I looked up for UK IMGs who've been to the US, I could only find one person on Google that had done it. I'm sure there were more, but like at the time, like, we didn't have Instagram where people would just share their journey. So I emailed this guy who was super helpful, and he kind of told me what he did. So
Wow.
I decided, okay, I'm gonna prepare for the USMLE step one. But it took me 8 months to prepare because I was doing my clinical year in med school. So I was going to hospitals in the day, coming back to study for like clinical exams, and then
Oh,
study for USMLE exams. So I did about 2 hours a day. But my main resources were UWorld, like hands down, first aid, and then I used Pathoma for pathology, and I used Boards and Beyond for videos. And I tried to do 2 hours a day, or 80 to 100 UWorld questions a day. And I think that was like the best approach, because UWorld was amazing. It just gives you the bread and butter of USMLE. And then whatever you didn't know, you didn't understand, you take from there, and then I would go on read about it. So that was my process for step one. I think I started preparing for it, I think it was February, and I set it in October. And after that, I set 2CS, which is now no longer relevant, and 2CK. 2CK was pretty straightforward for me. I think I just did it over 2 months, and I just did UWorld for 2 months. But I was also kind of somewhat fresh out of med school, and I was doing my intern year in the UK. So and it was so clinical that I felt, you didn't have to go back to the basic sciences the way step one required you to. Because step one was it was a lot. You have to keep going back to all the basic stuff.
yeah. And I think as IMGs, I don't know if this applies to everybody, especially if you're not, obviously non-US IMGs, adjusting to like a completely different curriculum when you're studying for step one. Was that
Mhm.
something you struggled with at any point in time when you were like, what material is this? How the questions obviously are different.
Yeah.
UWorld is very different from, the way other people in other medical schools around the world approach it. Was that something that you noticed as well when you were studying for step one?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, like the basic sciences wasn't like we didn't have heavy emphasis on basic sciences in the UK. So I felt like very lost. I felt like I don't know any of this, and this felt like my undergrad, because I was like, med school should be a lot more clinical than this.
Yeah.
So like, I had to relearn like biochemistry and like pharmacology and microbiology, which like I was lost on, because my med school experience didn't cover as much of that.
Yeah.
So definitely very different. And I kind of felt like, oh, should I just wait and study for step one on a separate time, because I don't really need what I needed for step one for med school. But in hindsight, step one exams did help my med school exams, because I was like, oh, actually it set a basis for my understanding for this disease or this thing. Like I probably knew more than I required for med school exams in the UK, but it helped me understand it so much better. So
well, that's another question that comes up a lot too, and a lot of the times, no, I can relate, trust me. Do you suggest or recommend that medical students kind of sync the resources that are used for step one into like studying for let's say studying for the actual exam? Let's say you were in medical school at that time, or doing clinical rotations or whichever. Is it something you would recommend, since you said that it helped you understand the material better when you were back in the UK?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on how well you time manage, because if you get really overwhelmed, with having to study for 2 exams, then don't do it, because graduating med school at that point is more important.
Yes.
Because if you don't graduate med school, if you don't sit your exams, you're not going to be able to come to the US. There is time for the USMLE, that's like, obviously you want to get here as quickly as you can, but graduating med school as an IMG would be more important. So only sync it if you feel like you can manage the workload. But in saying that, it does help, like especially from a UK background experience. I was shocked with how much it helped. And a few of my colleagues from the year below who were going through the same path as me, they're like, oh, I really don't know if I should do it. And then I was like, trust me, I did it and it was fine. And when they did it, they were like, oh, wow, it actually really helped me with my exams. And I scored way better like in my final year than I did in my second year exams, because I was doing the USMLE. So
yeah, that's incredible. Sort of like on the subject of, studying the UK and things like that, there was a question that reads, best pathway for an IMG who wants to work in the UK and has completed 1 year of internship.
So internship in their home country and wanting to come to the UK.
Yes.
Okay. So for the UK, you have to sit this exam called the PLAB, which I guess is kind of like the USMLE, but that's less basic sciences. It's a lot more clinical. But for people, IMGs who want to go to the UK, passing the PLAB exam is the most important thing to get a position in the UK. And once you pass that, you can apply into a training post, or you can start off with something called locum, where they have positions that are all open. You can get into a position for however many months and then apply for a training position when training position opens. And the UK is, I would say, pretty IMG friendly overall, because I worked with so many IMG doctors who were, came and did like a short locum position before applying for a training position.
Awesome. And so I wanted to transition to talking about visa, Cynthia, if that's okay. So there were questions that came up. One is, did you specify, okay, obviously your story is different, you kind of gave us like a sneak peek, but in your opinion, did you specify you want an H-1B visa sponsorship during interview? I know in your case it was different, right?
Yeah. So one of my reasons for applying this year and waiting was because I wanted to wait for my green card. I know that doesn't apply to everyone, because getting a green card means you need family here to be able to apply. But what I would advise you guys to do is look at whether or not your institution sponsors an H-1B, because if they don't, even if you tell them you wanted it, they won't sponsor it. And it would tell on each institution's website whether or not that's something they do. So the J1 is pretty straightforward and easy to get, because the ECFMG sponsors it, and IMGs can get that as long as they get a position, they're certified. The H1B requires you to have set step 3 as well. And once you set step 3, I'm pretty sure you have to sit step 3 for it now. And your institution has to sponsor it, because it's not sponsored by the ECFMG.
Okay, so I had no idea that if you wanted to apply for an H-1B visa, you actually were required to have taken step 3. So
I think you need to have applied or taken it. I will have to double check on that. But someone that I know who got the H-1B, she said that she had to sit step 3. It may be institutionally like different, but for her residency program, she needed step 3 before she got the H-1B.
Gotcha. And a huge, subject of concern for non-US IMGs especially are USCE. So can you share how you obtained LORs and what your USCE experiences were like?
Sure. So I only had 1 month of USCE. I know a lot of IMGs like, oh, we need to do like 2 months, 3 months, but I only had 1 month. And honestly, that was enough for me because I managed to get 2 mentors from that 1 month. And I actually had 2 letters being offered to me, but I only used one because the other letter, I felt like the lady doctor that I was with, I felt like she didn't know me well enough. So I didn't use that letter. And also my mentor, sorry, I had 2 mentors. One wrote my letter and then the one kind of just guided me through the whole application process and was willing to make phone calls and vouch for me when I had interviews.
Wow.
So that's why USCs are so important. You know, you make these connections and networks. So I definitely recommend people doing at least a month of USCE. So with COVID, I know a lot of things were canceled, but from my understanding, things are starting to open back up now. So definitely look at that. I did a month at Cornell in New York. It was excellent. You know, it doesn't matter what kind of program you can get into for USCE, but going to Cornell helped me because when my mentor wrote my letters, they're like, okay, this person did a rotation there, and they think that she could be a good anesthesiologist. So definitely try get a month, try make as much connections and networks so you can get your letters. And getting a mentor is so important during a USCE. I know just kind of tying into that, a lot of people ask about tele rotations and whether or not that's helpful.
Right.
I think it's really hard to tell because this year would be the first year people are applying with tele rotations.
Yes.
But if you get to work closely with someone, they can write like to your character, and like if you show them that you work really hard even though it's online, that's helpful. But they won't be able to speak to you on your clinical abilities. So but if you can't get anything, I guess getting a tele rotation would be better than nothing.
Exactly.
But things are opening back up now for people applying. So definitely look and see, if something opens up, jump on that opportunity and get yourself a month. If you can't get a month, even 2 weeks makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty sure people will want to know, like, what was your approach into like kind of getting that opportunity at Cornell, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, so Cornell offers, they have a global health program with their med school where they offer IMGs, electives. And my whole month there, I was with all IMGs,
Wow.
which was excellent. They have it in almost every specialty you want to go to. There are a couple of specialties where they only say for USMDs, but they have months and times. And if you fit into the month and times that they offer for IMGs, like go for it. It's expensive. That's a caveat. It is expensive, but you are paying for an opportunity and you are paying to be able to network with people. But do prepare to spend, like $5,000 for tuition and like flights and accommodation altogether. Yeah.
Altogether. And I think, especially now with IMGs, although you mentioned that it is starting to slowly open up, a lot of institutions are still, as of now, I'm sure this will change in like a few months, prioritizing their graduates, because a lot of them are transitioning from online rotations to in-person rotations. And I actually tried reaching out myself to like other institutions, and a lot of them had said our own medical students are having a hard time themselves, like getting rotations. And so now we're trying to focus on how we can get them to the hospitals and limiting, I guess, like outsiders from coming in. But like you said, the trend is starting to go where a lot of people and a lot of like physicians are opening up and allowing more outsiders to kind of like rotate. So yeah, definitely like looking into just trying until you find somebody who's willing to take you in, especially this year here in the US.
Yes, definitely.
This one is a really interesting question, Cynthia. Somebody asked, is it possible to match without USCEs? What's your take on that?
I think it's tough to match without USCEs. It's not doable, like I don't personally know anyone who has matched without a USCE. Most IMGs I know have had at least 2 weeks of US experience. So I think it's important because they want to know that you've done something here. But if you can, it's not the end of the world, like definitely try, because you may have this excellent resume and CV that they're like, hey, we want this person, we want to give them a chance, so let them come here. I think the USCE just makes a huge difference because when you do get these letters and these connections, they're like, okay, they've worked in the US, they know our system, they can do it here, and we're willing to take them. So it's definitely a tough question because I personally don't know any IMGs who've matched without USCEs.
And to your point earlier, the USCs are a great way for physicians who could potentially vouch for you come interview
Mhm.
season. So you just never know, like who out there is going to be like willing to help you and to write you quality LOR once you do start applying to match.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, especially since, you know, anesthesiology is very competitive, thinking about non-US IMGs or IMGs in general, what were your ways to kind of like beef up your CV, if that makes any sense? Did you make a plan for yourself to make sure you had XYZ? Like, did you put emphasis on research, things like that, volunteer work?
Mhm. So for me, I only had like one publication, and it was not in anesthesiology. And I had one conference presentation, again, not in anesthesiology, but they were both done in the US. So I don't know if that made a huge difference, but I think it may have made a difference because it was kind of a self-proposed project that I came up with. I reached out to professors like all around the US to ask if anyone wanted to do a project with me. And one of the professors at NYU was like, okay, let's do it. So I managed to do a month of research at the public health school in NYU. So maybe that helped because it's like, okay, this person is super resilient and like, they really push and they were determined. And again, like I said, my mentor, huge difference, like doing the USCE and having a mentor was great because I kept in touch with them throughout the whole, between me doing my USCE and applying, and kind of just gave them updates about like my life, what's happening in med school, graduating, starting work. And they just got to really know me as a person. They were like, okay, like, I think this person would actually be a good anesthesiologist. So I would be willing to help them with their application. So that was helpful. I think writing a good personal statement as well will be, very, very important. Get lots of people to read it, get them to see, get people you don't really know to read it. Be like, what do you think of me when you read this letter? Like, what do you think, what comes out and what stands out about me to you when you read this statement? And in terms of volunteer experience, I do have quite a lot of volunteer experience, not in the last couple of years, but over like med school and undergrad, I did a lot of volunteering. So I did include all of them. And I think one other big thing for me was kind of just owning my gaps and like, flaws in the application. So like I had, like I said, nearly 2 years of a gap. And I spoke about that. I like beefed up that time by doing a master's in public health as well. So I guess just being all rounded, like they obviously want someone with good grades, but they also want someone they know they can work with. So if you have good grades, but you're not a nice person or like you're difficult to work with, they may not necessarily be like, hey, well, like, should we really have this person if not everyone in the residency program can work with them? So kind of just showing them that you're giving this full all-rounded picture. Because I mean, they're humans too. And like, they obviously want someone that, yeah, like that will work well in their program.
Absolutely. And you talked about gaps.
Mhm.
During the interview process, Cynthia, is it something you voluntarily brought up, or was it something you waited for the interviewers to bring up?
So I actually wrote about it in my personal statement. So, and when they asked me, like, are there any red flags to your application or what are things that you feel like are concerns from your applications? I would say that, like, I think my gap and possibly my step score, like it may be a red flag to you guys, but I know that my gap is, and I just explained what I did, and they were happy with that.
Yeah, and to your earlier point again, you mentioned that just like owning
Mhm.
those, whether it's a red flag or whether it's a gap or whether it's a certain score that doesn't really, pass a certain like, because I know each program has a standard score that
Mhm.
they want applicants to kind of target. So I think it's great advice to really just like own it, and also at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of like find a way to explain it to where you improved or where you
Yeah.
were able to kind of, discover something new about yourself, or, things like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
so during the match process, Cynthia, were you focused on IMG friendly programs as you were like sifting through which programs to apply to for anesthesiology?
So because I had to stay in New Jersey, because my husband's in a residency program on his own already, I didn't have much choice as to where I could apply to. So I could only apply to North Jersey programs because South Jersey was again like 2 hours away. So it'd be too far for us to like for a commute, and some New York programs. I actually only applied to 14 anesthesia programs. And I applied to every program that I could. So I didn't really look at IMG friendliness or not. I just applied to all 14 programs that was within like an hour drive from me.
That's so, again, that's a unique approach, because a lot of the times the IMGs that are wanting to especially match to competitive specialties will apply to 100 plus or even like 200 programs sometimes. Going through the interview process, what were some of the things that interviewers were kind of most interested to ask you about?
I think every interview I had was like, tell me about yourself. That's such a common and annoying question because
It's
you're like,
hard too.
I've given you a CV, I've written everything about myself on a personal statement, and you want me to tell you about myself. It's like, oh my gosh. So that question I think was asked in almost every one of my application. I mean, every one of my interviews. And it, like you said, it's a hard question because you're like, how much should I be telling you? And like, how much do you want to know? And so that was a question. Yeah, that was one of them. And quite a few interviews did ask about, what you think your strengths and weaknesses are, either as a person or your application. So those are definitely good questions to have in the back of your mind to prepare yourself to answer. And one of my interviewers threw me off by starting the interview with, what are your questions for me? So always have questions ready for interviewers about the program, about them, but always have questions ready. And one thing that I want to say is, if you do get a list of your interviewers before your interview, because sometimes they do send you who's interviewing you, look them up and research them, like, find out about every single interviewer. Because I had that, and I looked up my interviewer. I was like, oh, I'm like, oh, you're an IMG too, or like whatever, and that's a connection. You start talking about whatever it is you want to talk about. Some of them may have really interesting research projects, so like show them that you've looked them up and you've read about them.
That definitely is a great way to show how interested you are in their program and that you are doing your homework. And again, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes programs just want to see how you communicate with them and how you're able to like carry a conversation. Were there any difficult or weird questions that came up, or were there any questions that were pertaining to you as an IMG specifically?
I can't think of them right now. There weren't many questions. No, I don't think I had any questions about me as an IMG, because I think they know, like, they're like, hey, I'm interviewing IMG, or like they see it in our application. So they kind of, they probably had like a little note on their notes about us being an IMG. So that didn't come up. But weird questions, no, just difficult questions. Yes. Like, what I was saying about the interviewer asking me if I had questions for them, or like weaknesses questions. I did have a question that kind of like led into a bit of my mental health topic. So I had one of my interviewers asking me, so how did you cope with COVID?
Really?
Which was like quite like a broad but tough question, because I was like, oh wow, I don't even know what to start. But I was like, I explained that I had just moved to the country, so it was tough. And it kind of like segued into my me struggling with my mental health. We never really got to the point of like a mental health diagnosis, or like how you're managing it, but it led to that. And I was like, hey, well, that was like an opening to be able to speak about that. And another institution that asked me some questions that were kind of like mental health related was like how you de-stress and how you kind of like wind down after a day at work.
I'm pleasantly surprised, Cynthia, that they asked you those questions, because I think at the end of the day, they also want to know how you're going to cope with stressful situations and how you deal with, challenges, because everybody knows that COVID was such a difficult, or it still is very difficult to deal with. And I'm glad that they sort of opened up the door to talking about mental health.
Definitely, because I was like, for one of them, I told them, like sometimes I just have a good cry, and they laughed. They're like, oh, that's good. I was like, yeah. I come back and I sit and I just cry.
Healthy outlets, right? Is what they're looking for. And so there's this question that came up. Can you provide or suggest a sample template or to express interest in research or USCEs? Because I know this can get like really intimidating and tricky for IMGs.
Yeah, so I actually have a template on my Instagram page that I use when I reached out to the 30-something professors for research. And I put it down on a Google link so that anyone who wants to access it can download it.
I'll share it for sure.
And in terms of USCs, I guess you could use the same template because it just kind of talks about you, what you want to do, like why you're interested in something. And then, yeah, you could use the same templates. But again, with USC, so many institutions just offer it. So you just need to kind of fill in the application form.
Right. And I'm going to make sure to like look for that post, Cynthia, and share it like in the description box so it's easier for people to access. And I'm pretty sure like a lot of people will want to know. It's hard to even think about a starting line for an email. It's sort of related to that. Were you picky about the subject line for each email? Because I know a lot of these, these doctors and people in academia, they receive so many emails. So as they're sifting through emails, they're probably looking at the subject line. Did you strategize like what to kind of like put on the subject line?
I think I just wrote like research interests or something very simple. Like I didn't want to make it too complicated because I didn't want to like not read it, but it was just something simple and hopefully enough to like capture their attention.
Yeah, definitely. This question I like. What was the hardest part of your journey as an IMG?
Oh, that is definitely a tough question.
You're back in like the interview process.
Yeah, like I'm just being IMGs as a whole is so tough because you have to go through all these extra hurdles to get here. Like USMLE is very much a part of the US MDs and DOs med school process, whereas for us, we have our own med school exams plus the USMLE. So I think for me, just the whole process was difficult. Like, having to juggle 2 different curriculums, having to juggle balancing it out and like being able to do all of that while still having a life and looking after myself was really tough. The first time I experienced like the worst burnout in my life was when I prepared for the USMLE because I was doing that. I was doing my clinicals. I was studying for like clinicals. I was still trying to see friends and family. So like just putting it all together was just like I had no time for anything.
Yeah.
So I think mentally it's a very tough process for anyone who's going through the US IMG process. I mean, the US route for IMGs, like, I'm sure all of you would completely relate with that. It's a tough mental process, but I think, yeah, like just mentally it's draining, it causes burnout, but looking after yourself is so, so important. Like I can't stress that enough because like it's so easy for people to just want to give up and so easy to be like, hey, I can't do this. But just taking time to take breaks, look after yourself will refresh you and get you back to this journey and this track because it is just a journey. Like we went to med school, we've graduated med school. So we've made it through 2 hurdles. We were accepted to med school, that's 1 hurdle. We graduated med school, that's another hurdle. So getting into a residency position it's another hurdle. But it's a doable one if you've already gone through 2.
And not just getting into residency, but getting into a residency in a different country, with a completely different process. And I just want to point out, Cynthia, that you are the first person that I've talked to who mentioned that you were juggling trying to study and do all that and at the same time taking care of yourself. You were the first person to mention that, and that goes to show that you were really trying to fit in, finding ways to take care of yourself. And I like how you put emphasis on burnout and how important mental health is because it's something that as IMGs, we were just so laser focused on the scores, right? The scores and the LORs. And then along the way, and I've experienced this myself as well, like you just get burnout and then your whole body shuts down. And I love that you talked about that so openly. And I know you also share a lot about mental health on your Instagram, right? That's
cool. I think like just having been through it and like you said, as IMGs, we're just so focused on scores because we go online, we read things and they say is like, if you don't score above a 250 as an IMG, forget it, and then you just get so like focused and you burn out and you forget that you have a life too.
Exactly. And another thing I wanted to mention, Cynthia is one of the few people who is like more than willing to kind of like help other IMGs out there. which is why she is so special, because you don't find a lot of people who just like are very welcoming. They just, want to help other IMGs, because she knows the struggle. She knows, she's been through it. She's in residency now, you guys. So she knows exactly. It's like huge, like surreal. I imagine it's so surreal for you. But two more questions that I have for you.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time, what are some of the things, if there are any at all, you would want to change?
I think just going back to what we were just talking about, like I was so fixed that I needed a certain score, and I needed to be able to like show them that I could do it as an IMG. And the whole time I was like, yeah, I need at least a 250. If I don't get that, I'm not going to make it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And that's something I wish I could tell myself now, like, it's okay. Obviously, a great score would make you like a candidate that they would just, take into an interview immediately. But there are so many other ways you can make up your CV and your application, which like, I'm living proof of, because my score was not a 250, but I did other things to get myself into interviews and then eventually into residency. So I think if I could tell myself anything, it's just to go back to my step one self and be like, Cynthia, like, it's fine to take breaks. I remember when my friends wanted to go for dinner, I'm like, no, I can't go to dinner. Or like, take a bath, go watch a movie, like
take a bath. Yes.
Just take breaks, because your study material and all that is there. It's going to come back to you. Yes, you'll forget things, but your URoad has like 4,000 questions, and the actual exam itself has like, how many questions do we have again? Like 300 questions. It's like 1/10 of what you've been preparing for. Like, obviously it's good to do as many as you can, but looking after yourself and just being able to not be like, okay, if I don't score above this percentage, that's it, like my life is over, which is what I kept telling myself all throughout my studies. I remember whenever I sit in MBME, and if it doesn't reach a certain cutoff score, I would just break down and be like, that's it, I can't go to the US, my life is over. Or like my US plan is over. I was like, okay, that's it, I'm not going. So just knowing that there are so many ways that you can come here, and there's so many ways you can make your application all rounded. It's not just a step score. That's something that I wish I told myself, because I mean, it nearly prevented me and stopped me from applying to anesthesiology, because I was like, I don't think I can do it with this score. So that's something I would change, and that's an advice I want everyone to remember when they're going through this.
Absolutely. And lastly, you already shared so many, so much great advice, Cynthia, but what advice still do you have for IMGs or medical students who want to go down a similar route as yours?
Yeah, so definitely have a good plan, like, have a long-term plan. Like, the USMLE journey is not tomorrow, it's a few years, it's years put into it. So kind of plan out, like, if you're in med school right now, when do you want to come to the US? Like, when would be a good time to study for it? Like, have a plan, whether you want to sync it with your exams or not sync it with your exams. And if you're a graduate, like, again, also have this schedule and this like timeline that you want to come to the US and get your things done, because you have multiple exams to sit, and after sitting exams you have to get certified. So you just want to make sure you do get things done on time so that you don't overwhelm yourself. And also just like, yeah, it's like a really stressful, difficult process, but just remember to have fun throughout the process, because like, I've met such amazing people now, like throughout this whole IMG journey. Like I met you, and it's been awesome. And, like just meeting all these different people and like learning about their journeys, and learning that there's so many different ways and different things you can use to get yourself there. It's not just in front of a computer, in front of a book 24/7.
Absolutely. And utilize social media to kind of connect with other people, because we're so lucky in this day and age to have access to so many people who are going through the same thing we are, like us. We're connecting, and this is so amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was like all of the things that I wanted to ask from you today. I know we're going to chat some more after this.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the time and effort you spent, sharing your journey with us, Cynthia. And of course, I will be leaving your Instagram handle in the description box, because I want people to follow you and your journey. And
thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you too. I'm so glad we connected.
I am so glad as well. So that wraps up today's episode of the IMG series. My name is Christina, and I will see you next time.